Hello, my name's Mill Williams. I asked this question, the one on the slide that we can see right now, quite a long time ago. I did it for a presentation I was asked to submit to a public-sponsored GovTech event. I didn't get on it in the end, but the process was really interesting because I asked this question. We have never satisfactorily answered why humans are clearly the strongest link in criminality, but equally clearly considered the weakest link in security. And yet it's clear equally that there are so many things we are so very good at when we're given the opportunity. In this presentation, I propose the creation, the repurposing of AI, of a particular kind of AI, one that's designed to deliver a machine version of the very best of human intelligence, AGI. But in this case, I'd like to repurpose it. I'd like to re-engineer the proposal, the concept as it exists from other places. I'd like to create an AGI which expands and enhances human beings, makes us more of what we already are. And in the context of crime, law enforcement, criminal justice, security, espionage, a whole bunch of ways of working on the world and making it a safer place, I'd then like us to be able to fight fire with humans. Introduction. Not what you think. So I honestly, sincerely believe what this slide says. Most of the security industry doesn't trust their clients, or maybe it does, in a sense. It trusts them to not be as competent as the criminals and terrorists they're looking to be protected from. As a result, for whatever reason, and we'll go into that later in the slide deck, the security industry believes it's enough to use lots of machines with humans as an extension of the same. Now I'm going to ask you a painful question. It'll be painful for everybody, I'm sure. I'm going to propose we choose between two teams, and each has to anticipate the next 9/11. Not the same crime, though. Not where, when, and who, either. No. What and how. Just what and how. The two teams. Number one, a big room full of the very best AI machines. And number two, and remember, you can only choose one or the other. You can't choose both. A big room full of 40 of the very best Hollywood script writers. Screenwriters, I think the Americans would say. Being human still, that is, not chat GPTs, please. So which would you choose in order to be able to imagine and anticipate the next terrorist attack as impactful as 9/11 was in its time? To that degree of terrible efficiency, I mean. Remember, not the when, where, and who. Not that. Just the new what and how. Yes, it is an uncomfortable question. Because we all know that machines predict the future on the basis of the past. Whereas humans what we really do well, or well in a terribly evil sense, if you like, we sometimes use machines as extensions of ourselves really well. Instead of the other way around, as all big and small security tech companies prefer. And as a result, we can then imagine the future on the basis of something that has never happened, ever, just like 9/11. And then we can deliver something as awful, as horrific as 9/11, in a way that no machine can possibly imagine from the past. Why are humans the strongest link in criminality, but considered, and here I would add, in to this question, by the security industry as necessarily the weakest link in security? This is the reason why, in my opinion, it's only my opinion, you can disagree, you will, criminals play to human strengths and deepen them over their lifetimes. Yes, let's drill into the case of 9/11. Because it was delivered by humans extending themselves with awfully repurposed tools and machines. And no, machines didn't stop what happened. Didn't stop an unpredictable act of, in hindsight, quite predictable delivery. Machines failed us, the good citizens. But humans plus machines didn't fail the bad guys. Why this happened in the first place? Not what you believed. Because this hasn't only happened when 9/11 took place. Because some people, some leaders, some permanently powerful individuals, they continue over the decades to flummox Western democratic teamwork in all its aspects. Particularly because when we work as a Western democratic team, we depend on tools and software architectures which surveil. And as they surveil, they fatally inhibit our creative free thinking. That is, just as much in respect of our good crime fighters, security agents, and thinking citizens, people like you and me, as they do in respect of the Putins of the world. Except that the Putins of the world have clearly devised their own ways of avoiding our surveillance. And the evidence of their actions over the years, as they continue to flummox Western democratic teams' dependence on unimaginative machines, it just shows that we have actually chosen. This is our choice to deliver in three very poor and ineffective ways. One, these three ways, these poor, ineffective ways, the ones that I mentioned on the previous slide. The first one being, we believe the Putins, they're essentially unpredictable. They are not. They are unpredicted, but only because we rely on security philosophies that demand humans should only be extensions of machines. And why does that happen? In my opinion, and again you will disagree, not just that you can, but that you will, but I hold firm to this one. Machines are easier to monetize than humans interacting in complex ways with the same. And therefore, the problem lies primarily at the door of tech partners when they assure us that machine dependency is a good thing. The second poor and ineffective way we deliver on. When our security philosophy suggests it's enough to track the when, where, and who of crime and global terrorism, in order at the same time to deliver professionally on any new whats and hows, we end up never using humans for what we're best at. That is to say, intuition. And if you don't like that word, hunches. And if that one's not so good, operational thinking without thinking, and gut feelings, and maybe even high-level domain expertise if we want to get that fancy. And so because our tech partners then tell us a machine primacy and dependency are quite enough, we ourselves, we never even think to ask the question. The question being, if we spend resources on validating intuition and hunches, could we not get to the point where we shared them more comfortably at the same time as obtaining even better insights in the first place? Even better than the ones we already achieve. So not just capture and validate them, but actually enhance and ultimately upskill our abilities to be intuitive and hunchful. The third thing that we do really badly as a civilization, as a society, as an industrial sector, and as a community of like-minded people who want to act in good faith, is when our big and small tech partners tell us it's not possible to do something. But they're not, when they do so, they're not considering the problem the customer has suffered from to that point. They're considering more the problem the supplier will have from that point on. Because they will have to admit that the new problem posed, in this case being intuition and hunches, are actually data sets which we need to learn to validate for solid operational and citizen safety reasons. They will have to admit that they have long chosen, because they judge them less revenue generating, not to address such key data sets and their needs. Even when the creative criminality of Putin's kind, but also of the embedded and organized local and regional gangs and mafia-like organizations across frontier lines everywhere, firmly knows, this creative criminality just knows how to think deeply like this in order to develop new ways of committing crime. And these organizations, by the by, serve equally to sustain wholly illegitimate invasions, such as that of Russia on Ukraine. The money has to come from somewhere. It comes from embedded Russian and related organized crime in many, many countries. And we're allowing it to happen because of the way we conduct our security philosophies. So what am I saying here? Does the security sector do no good at all? The security industries, I mean. No, we're really not saying that. It is very good, although sometimes unnecessarily privacy insensitive in the choices it encourages some governments to take at tracking when, where, and who. But it's not good at imagining what used to be called dark figure, and which I prefer to call neocrime. That 20 to 40% of criminal activity which is invisible for a wide variety of reasons, they're not all the same ones, but the invisibility exists in relation to the systems we already have, systems which are designed to track all kinds of criminal activity. And not only track this activity, but actually bring it to book. However, where the industry acts in supremely bad faith, I'm talking about the security industry here, is when it transmits the idea that intuition and hunches, the daily bread and butter of all security and law enforcement officers' professional duties, that they're not data sets. And if they are, well, sorry guys, we simply don't know how to capture and validate them. And, more importantly, nor can we know for quite a while yet. But listen up. Meantime, traditional AI has obtained billions of funding to achieve something that over the years has been just round the corner, and still is, and still gets its funding. So that's both a choice and a lie, at the expense of professional, victim, and witness security. Emotion and intuition, not what you assume. The thing is, intuition is not emotional. It really isn't. We know this, sometimes intuitively. It's used by very many logical and rational professions to take decisions quickly and accurately. The problem for intuition is that sometimes we don't know why we have been shown to be right. But hey, that's true also of big tech's deepest AI algorithms. Meantime, really without wanting to get into a fight, what's also true is that many intuitive thinkers, people like myself, for example, people who are happy to be defined as such, self-defined as well as defined by the outside world, we often get very emotional when talking about what we believe we know. But that's not because the thinking process is emotional. Really, these days, insofar as tech is so important to almost everything we do, it's because no data scientist on the planet, honestly, sincerely, frankly, cares to openly admit that intuition is a data set which deserves even a minimal funding in order that it can then be duly validated. So the emotion we all express as intuitive thinkers, as thinkers of intuitive thoughts, it doesn't come from the thoughts that are arising, but from the frustration of not having the software tools and platforms to hand that other data sets have absolutely no problem encountering. The emotion isn't because of the intuition itself, but rather because those of us who like to admit to being intuitive get frustrated, really, really do, really wound up. And you've seen this, those of you who choose not to be intuitive. When what we know, well, when what we know we simply can't demonstrate to the people we also feel deserve to know. Now, with all this, I'm really not underestimating the importance of data science. Actually, not. It's a hugely invaluable profession. It saved us during COVID-19. Every day it brings many insights for security, law enforcement, and a whole bunch, medicine, education even, which prevent the when, where, and who of new atrocities. So sometimes its best work is done where none of us can fully appreciate that it has been, like the people who work in all of those fields. But you can't argue that it enjoys emotion. Maybe even its practitioners in their daily work, I mean. I don't mean as private citizens or people who have people around them at home. They don't enjoy feelings, unease, the profession I mean, the sensations of weird and of wonder. Data science sees all of these things as generally not worthy of inspection. And even more so, it enjoys even less any attempts to provoke more emotional input into its data sets from the start. I know this myself. I've spoken to people in security. They know there is no alternative to using their sixth sense every single day of the week to protect themselves, their colleagues, and their citizens. And I've spoken to data scientists and they say, don't give me the emotion. That's their first response. Now myself, by temperament, I studied criminal justice, a master in criminal justice, which I graduated from in 2017 as recently as, me being 61 now. And so I remember during that period as an academic, by temperament, I had been an autoethnographer. That means someone who believes in the technical value and accuracy of metacognitive processes around lived experience. Metacognitive meaning that I know why I think the things I think, even if I also recognize I'm wrong to think them. But I do know why the feelings arise. And in relation to that skill set, which I definitely have, I know what data science thinks of it. And it doesn't think good. However, as already alluded to, security and law enforcement deal with emotions and their channeling every single minute of every single working day. An example. I was told this by the Chief Constable of Lancashire Constabulary when he gave a speech, a conference, a short conference, a mini conference speech at Liverpool John Moores University a couple of years ago. And he gave this statistic. In the course of their career, a British police officer, on average, can expect to witness 400 life and death experiences, either on their person or as witnesses to. Now the rest of us human beings, police officers are human beings, but the rest of us citizens, maybe 10 or 11 of these. And this figure, not just during a career, but a whole lifetime, 60, 70, 80 years of life lived, and maybe 10 or 11, whereas in 30 years of a job, 400. So what am I saying with all of this? Apart from the personal cost, which is immense, those 400 experiences per officer and professional are an immense corpus of praxis and professional know-how going to waste. All of that contains intuitive data, hunches, thinking without thinking, high-level domain expertise of the very highest. Actions, events, reactions, assumptions, presumptions, mistakes. This is why I say, this is why I say any law enforcement or security philosophy which claims that the total primacy of machines is all we need. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm laying this one at your doorstep. Those of you who work in security and are reading this and are getting frustrated yourselves. But it simply prefers, your sector simply prefers to allow people to suffer their abandonment at the hands of machine-heavy law enforcement, security and criminal justice systems, alongside an often immensely contrarily manual set of legal processes. We actually do have two extremes here. On the one hand, it's just machines, and on the other hand, it's just people. It's mad. There has to be a middle way. And then again, sometimes citizens actually die unnecessarily. 9/11 is a case in point. I'm sorry to say this. You're going to be really unhappy with me for saying this and repeating it over and over. But no one is taking this one on the chin, and we need to in order to move forward. And this happens. Citizens dying unnecessarily, whilst the dollars and pounds and euros rack up easily for all sizes of tech who prefer this thing of machine primacy over a more complex set of processes which would involve human primacy supported by machines. So, as with all presentations, with all slide decks, with all proposals, it's not just a question of laying out the problem as the presenter may see it, as the author may see it. It's also a question of providing solutions. You don't actually want to present a problem without a solution. That's not pat. That's not just laying it out to be clever or corporate or whatever. It's actually necessary to act like this. So the next section is why secrecy positive architectures and how there's now no alternative. Okay, I was in Sweden for most of the past year, the past 12 months or so. I went there at Christmas for the first time in my life because my sister lives there and she emigrated 2 years ago and she invited me over for Christmas. And I found a place which made me immensely creative because it was a place of freedoms willingly embraced by the state. And there, it's all available in an online white paper website, web space. A whole bunch of different ideas around law enforcement and social engineering and so forth. But in amongst all our work, I devised a scale of 4 levels of thinking spaces which would help enable the human supportive capture, enhancement, upskilling and final validation of all these things. Human intuition, hunches, irrationality, that is to say neither rational nor irrational, some middle way. High-level domain expertise, operational thinking without thinking, and gut feeling. These can be found at the following web spaces, white papers. So it's a white paper. This one's a white paper in 4 sections. It's got other elements attached to it too. But it ranges. The important thing is that it ranges from privacy sensitive, which most of us could be these days with existing architectures if we wanted to, without any invention, without simply innovating or tweaking even, not even innovating. We could all be privacy sensitive if we chose to. Privacy positive would require a bit more than tweaking. It would require innovation. It would require changing certain ways of architecturing our tech. Secrecy sensitive is just going further along the line and would involve some invention as well as innovation. And secrecy positive, this is where I want us to go. This would require invention over innovation and would be a Pandora's box, if you like, dangerous. But then it was Marie Curie who said that we should embrace the dangerous because, and she said it in a way better than I've said it, but Foucault was along the same lines many years later. He said that everything is dangerous. But because of this, these dangerous things demand that we study them. So in some countries like the UK, I can see that privacy sensitive will be the maximum tolerable for the security philosophies employed habitually by the agencies and police in the country in question. This is clear. Agencies like MI5, Homeland agencies, law enforcement, police and so forth, counter-terrorism in the UK don't agree with encryption for private citizens. I don't know if it's already on the statutes, but it's going through Parliament and it's been through the House of Lords, I believe, on second readings recently and so forth. So if we do anything in the UK, it will never be more than privacy sensitive. That's absolutely clear. However, in other regions and nation states, we can go further. These things can work in parallel. We can work with the UK on its terms. But where I'm looking to do the research is not in the UK, because the UK doesn't want that kind of research. But in other regions and nation states, and here particularly I'm thinking about the Nordic regions and Sweden, which I have some experience of, the existing privacy-friendly cultures will mean they are more amenable to pursuing even the maximums of secrecy positive as described on the previous slide. And I have to give you an example of this. In Vällingby, which is a suburb of Stockholm, they have a metro station, and in the metro station I have a photo taken of this. So anyone who wants the photo as evidence, I'm happy to provide that out with this presentation at some point when you get in touch with me, if you do. Basically the little sign there's two signs. One of them says that no CCTV images are retained for longer than 144 hours, I think it is, sometimes less, depending if they're on vehicles or in the metro itself. And only the police only the police, which means the CCTV operators, is my understanding, ever get to see those images. Once those timelines have gone past, those deadlines have gone past, it's wiped out, and any citizen who needs that evidence because of some kind of criminal or aggressive act on the public transport system, once that timeline has gone by, they will not be able to use that resource as a recourse for the citizen. But the second one is a bright idea the Swedish have had, which is to use CCTV without recording the images, without recording the image stream. And this demonstrates the capacity of a free-thinking society to think more. It's really important, I won't go into the detail here, but it's really important for Swedish society that CCTV is respectful to the citizen. That it is an extension of the citizen, not the state. In this particular instance, they're trialing a suggestion, a proposal, a structure, a system, which means that the CCTV images are used in order to detect to detect anomalous incidents through algorithms on the stream itself of these particular streams. And then what happens is these streams are date stamped, are time stamped for each anomaly. And if a citizen comes to the police afterwards and says, look, around this time somebody spoke to me in a really aggressive manner or stole a phone or whatever, they will then have the backup of a stream which has been used to timestamp and date stamp in privacy respectful ways to everyone else in the carriage, in the wagon at the time, but still provides the evidence that can be used as validation in a court of law. Now, I'm not saying whether this is a successful trial or not, but what I am saying is that he wouldn't even get to trial in the UK. There's no one in the UK who'd be prepared to use CCTV without recording the images. Zero, I can guarantee it. And what I'm looking for is the imagination, the capacity for imagineering, the capacity to push forward and outward the envelope of how we need to fight creative criminality. We need to be as creative ourselves. That's what this example demonstrates. So, secrecy positive, even privacy sensitive. Why pursue these ideas in the first place? Apart from the example I've just given, it's a good question, and the answer is simple. After the horrors and atrocities that 9/11 visited on Western and related democracies in just one terrifying morning, the expansion of total surveillance strategies, it was going to happen. It had to happen. No argument. However, such surveillance strategies, whilst delivering on a more secure civilization and society, haven't delivered feelings of safety. They've had considerable downsides. One considerable downside in particular, which even professionals and practitioners, I believe, are still not fully cognizant of. Because whilst total surveillance doesn't impact the Putins of the world and their capacity to think creatively, they clearly have their own secrecy-positive tech. What it does do is it leads the rest of us to engage in a dreadfully subtle and unappreciable self-censorship in the ways we think or indeed have forgotten how to do. And what's that meant? These unpredictable, in inverted commas, Putins, who all predictably retain their nonconformist, their awful nonconformist creativity. Ourselves, we have lost the capacity to be nonconformistly creative in such parallel ways in order to fight them on a level killing field. And I say killing field here because we have Ukraine up front as an example. So this is the rationale, this is my rationale for why new, even minimally privacy-sensitive architectures and approaches would be wholly welcome. Because they would support us all into becoming more systematically and more consistently intuitive and irrational. And so this level killing field I spoke about, fighting on equal terms, this would allow us to do so in respect of criminals, nation states and private sector both, who've chosen all this time to remain as awfully creative as they have. So back to the question. Why are humans the strongest link in criminality, as they continue to be, but are considered, as I have already said, and as I've already made specific and concrete and overt, considered by the industry of security as the weakest link in that security? And the answer is on the left there. Let's now put to one side whether you agree with me in the case of 9/11 or not. But you can find, I'm sure you must agree with me that criminals play to human strengths and deepen them over their lifetimes. You surely cannot disagree with that explanation of why humans are the strongest link in criminality. That's what happens. So why don't we use tech to make it happen in security? Instead of just saying, let's forget the people and just use the machines. Final goal. This is one more idea, which again I came up with in Sweden this summer. I produced a series of 3 slide decks for 4 boot camps I proposed. There's a macro version out there online. And I'm quite happy again to supply this individually to people who contact me at some point in the future. But the final goal, the one I think we really need to address, on the back of all of these ideas which I've presented today, is to build the fearless citizen. Not the fearless citizen, the fearless citizen. And therefore be able to deliver an invasion-free future we come back to Ukraine. We must. This is the first slide of that first of the three, that series of three slide decks in relation to the boot camps for ensuring no future Ukraines, no future invasions of Ukraine. Creating the conditions so the future Ukraines will never happen again. And I list three types of criminality there, and I list them in reverse order of practical elimination, because I think that the first one is the one that has led to Ukraine being invaded, has led to Russia dominating geopolitics in the way it has. Eliminate all common crime in 13 years. I honestly think with tech and focus we can do that sort of thing. Gaslighting, a tech-driven gaslighting, which I call neo-terrorism on the individual, which is used to shape societies so that people who could change, game changers of Western democracy, good game changers, who would stop countries like Russia embedding themselves in the establishment of the UK as it has done over the past decade or two. Russia has, in my opinion, has actively used neo-terrorism, tech-driven gaslighting, in order to ensure that certain people do not get into power and other people do. So eliminate that in 7 years. Part of the problem of gaslighting of this nature is that if you don't realize it's a crime, you don't look for it anywhere. But the most important thing here is eliminating loopholes and related societal harm in 20 years. There's actually a term for this, a sociological or criminological term, emiology, which is societal harm, which is legal. Russia does a lot of that. China too. And a bunch of other private sector actors, big tech in some form or another, has gaslit the Western world since Google search in 25 years ago, saying they were doing one thing when they were really doing another. But I'd like to start from scratch with as many people as possible. That includes big tech like Google and Microsoft's OpenAI. If they wanted to change, I'd be interested in those all changing, but for the better, for a common good. So who wants in on this? The fourth boot camp proposal, the third slide deck, is as follows. The real problem is fearful citizens. I talk about how Putin keeps his society under control. He has done for 23 years, I think it is. How he makes people fearful, terrified of acting democratically in a nominal democracy, which isn't because they're terrified of acting, of calling people out, saying, hey, that's not it. But from the start, not 20 years later when it's much too late. The stat. Mental distress in English-speaking countries. It comes from 2008, before pandemic, before Ukraine, before 3 wars which Putin has delivered in the past 15 years. An average 23% of Americans, Britons, Australians, New Zealanders and Canadians suffered mental distress in the last 12 months. It's the 1 in 4 figure we get quoted. I'm from the UK. In UK, this 1 in 4 figure that we're all touched. A quarter of us are all touched by mental ill health. At some time in our lives, some point in our lives, it's a quarter of us. However, this figure is half that. Actually half that, less than, when we talk about Germans, Italians, French, Belgians, Spaniards and Dutch. Now what's going on here? It's not the language. According to the writer, Oliver James, the link below, it's still online, it's our socio-economic frameworks which deliver environmental distress. We're not the victim, the cause is not the victim. When we say somebody is mentally ill and we must medicate them, in terms of this slide here, in terms of the research behind this slide, when we say we need to medicate someone who's mentally ill, what we're doing is we're blaming the victim, probably, of environmental distress. And maybe that environmental distress is deliberately caused. I would sustain it is. I've written a PhD draft proposal which points to this. But either way, whether you agree with me or not, that difference, those two stats, are awfully distressing in themselves. So I propose something I've called the A.I.M proposition. My goal here is to use tech and society, social engineering, and a whole bunch of intersectional things to ensure our citizens revert to being the democratically fearless citizens we all need us to be. We can't stop Putin in the future, people like Putin, in the future, from a centralized perception and philosophy of security and geopolitical stability. It has to be citizens who do it from the ground up, who want to, who feel safe enough to. The Arab Spring was based on a Twitter which was shaky, it turned out in the end, and is now like, who would use X? I mean, for goodness sake. But the idea, the principle, is that we should combine good tech with good law, with good overarching inalienable human rights as per the UN Charter and so forth. New ones we add in. And we create a proposition which I've called A.I.M. The first element is A for access. Everyone becomes absolutely convinced that no one can access their data in the context of crime fighting and all related until they choose to share it. Because we create systems of information processing which make it literally impossible to do so. And this would help us make it possible for people who suffer from mafias and mafia-like control, using symbolic language of communities, a symbolic language which is impossible to take to court and prosecute. It would make it possible, combined with intuition validation, for people to start coming forwards, for them to want to start coming forwards when the criminal justice and law enforcement systems were legitimate. So even in countries like the UK, European countries we hope still find some degree of impulsive attachment to doing good. The second of the A.I.M proposition, second element of the A.I.M proposition is for innocence. Our systems will be increasingly designed from the ground up to ensure no one is treated as being guilty until they are duly proven to be. And I don't just mean legal codes either. Just as important is software codes, particularly software codes, and in all contexts, not just defense, espionage, and security and law enforcement. So everywhere. Let's assume you're innocent before we assume you're guilty. And let's never assume you're guilty. Let's only say you're guilty when you are, when the evidence has clearly pointed the finger in your direction, and the punishment and the sentence and the due process then kicks in. And finally, the third element of A.I.M is my rights. The respectful, fearless democratic citizen is built out of culture, not law. The rule of law only flourishes in a world where it fits the cultures of those found around such a rule. And the democratic citizen only becomes so when they sense intuitively and impulsively that all is good in the garden of lawmaking's attachment to their culture. Law only works when there is a culture in favor of law, of good law, what I call good law, good democracy. Peter Levine's good democracy. That tension, that effervescent, ever-present tension between efficiency on the one hand, which we do need in democracy, and inclusiveness on the other hand, which democracy cannot exist without. And so as this slide deck is this extract from the 4 bootcamp slide deck, macro slide deck says, the conclusion of that macro slide deck, the end of the third one. If we do find ourselves acting cruelly or unkindly, not being the 74% who identify with unselfish ways of being and delivering our work and play and home life, perhaps we should ask the following question. What happened to make us like this? Despite our better intentions, despite how we remember ourselves. And as I said at the beginning, there are so many things we are so very good at when we are given the opportunity.